we don't gatekeep around here. We want to know the things that people are actually doing, not like the things they want to tell social media that they're doing. And so today, I want to do We Don't Gatekeep, everything I wish I knew about starting a podcast before I launched my podcast. Most of the advice out there is copy paste, copy paste. They're all kind of the same thing, but there's so many little things that I don't think people recognize or think of until you're actually in the messy middle of creating the podcast and you're like, oh, dang, now I have to figure this out and I got to go buy this. There's all these little problems that you have to troubleshoot. No matter how many videos I watched on how to start a podcast, none of them actually prepared me for actually creating the podcast. Hey, builders, and welcome to the Girls Who Build podcast, where we get real on what it's like in the messy middle of building a business and learn from the world's biggest brands that are shaping culture. So grab your hard hat, step onto the site, and let's get building. Welcome to the Girls Who Build. I want to start every episode with my highs and lows of the week. It just gives you a quick little glimpse into my life and my journey and what I'm going through before we get into the meat of the episode. My high of the week is that I got a lot of really positive feedback on this podcast. I was a little nervous about putting it out there. Honestly, I just didn't think a lot of people would even hear it or care or take the time to listen to it. So I'm really, really excited that people are resonating with it and it's something that is interesting to a lot of people that are in a similar place. I want this to be a huge movement for us. It just gave me a little bit more motivation to keep doing this and to keep showing up. But thank you if you took the time to listen to any of the episodes. I really, really appreciate you. I know that there's a million things that you could be doing. So listening to me yap for an hour or an hour and a half is really, really helpful and just means the world to me. The first episode was a 30-minute, like my journey type of episode. If I'm going to have guests on this show, I want them to be vulnerable too. And I want them to share about their own journey. So it's only natural for you to get to know mine too. My second episode was a deep dive on rare beauty and branding and having a meaningful brand and strategy. Please go ahead and leave a review on Apple. Apple is, I think, the most seriously weighted when it comes to reviews and ratings. And it really does help them kind of boost it, especially as a new podcast. That would mean the world to me if you could leave me a review on Apple. I'm thinking I would like to have a mixture of 3 different formats on rotation. So the first type that I really want is the vulnerability conversations. These are going to be the ones with women in the messy middle. I want people to really share what they're going through, the good, the bad, the ugly, anything that we can all take from that and learn and make us feel like we're not alone in the journey. The second type of episode that I want to create is the brand breakdowns or campaign breakdowns. Learning from a different perspective is always useful. And I love looking at the big brands out there and get some really cool out of the box, unique ideas on things that you can implement within your own business. You always want to be innovative and thinking of the next type of campaign that you can launch for your business. And the third kind of episode, I actually got this idea after meeting one of my friends. We were talking about how a lot of things are gate kept about just the entire process of building a business. And I want all of us to talk about the things that people aren't really talking about, because what is the point of a community if you're not helping each other out, helping each other grow, support in any way possible? And if you guys have any specific questions about anything that I've been through, please leave me a comment, let me know, and I would love to talk about it and make it an episode. So my red lights for the week are my time management skills. I think I've got a lot of things I'm juggling right now. I tend to get overwhelmed when I've got a million things going on, but hello, that is the life of a business owner. You're going to be doing a ton of things, right? So balance is key. I would do these 90-minute focus bursts. And I would really deep dive and go completely focus mode, silence my phone, and just like focus on one task for 90 minutes. Take a little bit of a break and then do another 90 minutes. And I would do that 3 times a day. But anytime something new is introduced, like me starting a podcast, I need to rework that a little bit, because before I had 3 very specific categories that I would focus on every single day. One of them was content. The second thing was client work. And the other one was outreach and sales. So I just need to figure out how to balance that a little bit more. What I typically do is I go to YouTube and I find the Pomodoro timers and I try to find one that's 90 minutes and I put that on, and it's really, really great for productivity. Those 90 minutes have been crucial for allowing me to have the clarity and the creativity to just dive into something full force. There's another app, it's called Life At. It's really cool because you can pick different scenes that you want, and it's just like a coffee shop or rain or like cozy cabin vibes or ocean vibes. And then they have a Pomodoro timer and it'll have music and it's all free. I mean, a couple things on there you have to pay for, but they have a couple of different features like you can put your to-do list in there and it's a really cute little thing that you can just have on your screen at all times. And that allows me to focus without having all of the tabs open on my computer. But today, I have everything on my phone because I wanted to make sure I did not forget anything that we're going to talk about. So I have a whole list of things that I want to go through. The first thing we are going to start with is strategy. I think so many people are like, yeah, I just want to talk and do something with my friend, and we just want to yap for like an hour or two on a podcast. And that's great, but I am a girl who likes strategy. That's like the biggest thing, like why you're doing something and it's an effective use of your time and it's not just something random that you're throwing into the mix that's just going to make you more overwhelmed. So we're going to talk about strategy. The second thing we're going to talk about is the actual setup, because boy, do I have a lot of information there during my process of learning how to put this setup together. The lighting, the microphone, the camera, how to make sure that you're looking as professional as possible, even in the comfort of your own bedroom. The third thing we're gonna do is the editing, right? So a lot of people don't talk about how to edit the right way. And I think there's an art to editing for sure, but there's a way to do it effectively and quickly, right? So that you're not eating up all your time, because editing is the biggest time suck. I've learned this the hard way. I have been making YouTube videos for a long time and it can take a lot of time and commit. It's like a whole nother job to do just editing alone. And it's like basic editing too. So I'm going to talk about some useful ways to use AI to do that. And then the final thing is launch, because if you're going to put all this time and effort into creating a podcast, you might as well launch it correctly. And this is a little bit of marketing and a little bit of things that I've learned along the way that have really helped me. So let's get started. Let's talk about the strategy of it all. So the first thing I want to make very clear, if you want to do a podcast with your friend and just have something to do to get your name out there and maybe you can get famous, that's fine. And maybe this is not advice you want to take. But for me, I think there needs to be a goal. So if it's just for fun, then it doesn't matter. But if it's for a goal, like if you are putting the time and energy into something and you want to make something useful out of it, I do think it's important to have a goal. I think there's two types of goals that you should have. There's going to be one that's external and like outward focused. So that goal might be you want to create impact. You want to build community. You want to connect with other people that are going through XYZ. And that's an outward goal that you are communicating that to people, right? Like that's the mission. That's the purpose of your entire podcast. And I think it's important to have that very specifically laid out so that there's meaning behind it and people can resonate with it. But on the other side, I think inwardly, you need to think, okay, what is the reason I'm doing this? Is it to make money? And how am I going to monetize this if that is the case? Because if you're depending on ad revenue, hate to break it to you, but you're going to have at least a minimum of 1,000 downloads per episode in order for you to try to even get recognized for brand deals and partnerships. So if that's not something that you're going to do right off the bat because you don't have the network and you don't have the like follower count on social media yet, and unless you're like an influencer, then obviously that's a different ball game. But if you're starting from square one and you're starting at 0 followers, you're probably going to want to think about something more long term. For me, outwardly, I wanted this to become a community of women who are going through the same thing because I was lacking that community in my own life, right? And I want to talk to more women. Selfishly, I want to find women who are in the Austin area that I can maybe even become friends with and build a relationship with. So that was like the outward goal that I had. And that's still very true. But also, I mean, I do have a marketing agency and I would love to see if there's a good fit with anybody that I talk to, whether it's people listening to the episodes or people that are coming on the podcast. And I build my network and my circle of people who are business owners and entrepreneurs. And maybe one of them maybe possibly would want to do some marketing with me, right? And then we'd work together. And so that's kind of the way that I thought about this. And then my other goal was to have content that I could repurpose for social media to balance out and try to stay consistent without having to constantly film more stuff. I always do think it's important that in a content strategy, you should have at least one long form that trickles down into your short form. And I think a lot of people don't put the time and energy that it requires for long form, but that's like the best way to build a relationship versus trying to be on Instagram and just spinning your wheels constantly. Like I'm a yapper. I think I do best in long form anyway. I think that's the way people understand where my heart is and where I'm coming from when I talk about things. And so I think that's a natural fit for me. I think it's a natural fit for most people. It just requires effort and time because it's long form. It's going to take a long time. So yeah, I do think you should have an outward goal and an inward goal and be able to clearly identify both of those. The second thing is choosing between having a co-host or doing solo episodes or having interviews. I think a lot of people will say they want a co-host because it's easier to bounce ideas off of each other. The energy is very different when you have a co-host because you can yap to each other and it could be funny and and I get that. I see that 100%. And I think I would do really good in a co-host situation too. But I had to think from the lens of this is for a business, right? And obviously, I want it to be fun, but I'm going to get that relationship building, that bounce ideas off of each other from my guests. I've heard too many horror stories of people who have partnered with someone for a podcast. And at that point, you got to create an LLC. Now you have a business partner. And a lot of people go into creating a podcast super nonchalantly when in reality, it is a business deal, right? And if things go really well for you, that's great. But with more success, there's a lot more chance if you're not with the right person that there could be a really messy divorce. I just remember Call Her Daddy and the whole Sophia drama with her and with Alex and Sophia. That was just one very, very public, big idea of that. But there's so many instances where that could happen. And I don't know. If I'm going to go into business with someone, I want it to be a good balance of personalities, but also talking about your long-term goals, right? Not just the personality and how well you guys click to talk on a microphone, but do you guys both have the same dreams in mind? Do you both want to do the same thing with that podcast? Do you both have the time commitment for that podcast, right? If you both have full-time jobs or one of you is full-time and the other one is trying to work for yourself, that could cause some conflict. So really making sure that all of those things align and that you have the same idea for the future. So you want to make sure that you both connect. The third thing that I want to talk about is everyone has a podcast. In this day and age, it's actually really easy to create a podcast. It's a little bit pricey, it's a little time consuming, but all in all, everyone has a podcast these days. So if you're going to create one, I really do want to stress that it's important to pick an angle and a topic that is interesting and offers a different perspective than something else that's already out there. I think that a lot of people just have an idea of the category that they want to talk about. Like, okay, I like marketing. Well, I'm going to talk about marketing. Well, now think about all of the marketing podcasts that are out there. Even do some research and see what all those options are. Are they all interviewing guests? Are they all solo episodes? Is it more lifestyle or is it more education? And if you can see what angle people are coming from, then you can try to offer a different perspective. But I don't know if you should start a podcast until you can clearly identify what that difference is. You could even use ChatGPT for this. Actually, I did that a lot at the beginning. These are the kind of podcasts that I'm seeing. These are the podcasts that I listen to and the ones I like and the reasons I like them. Now, tell me, where is there a white space in the podcast world? Like, what is the gap that I can come and fill? What are most people doing and how do I set myself apart and be a little bit different? And that's why I decided to do the brand deep dives, because I thought the brand deep dives were something that offered marketing from a different lens. It was a little more storytelling versus how to do XYZ, right? Because I'm picking campaigns and brands that are already well known, it allows me to tap into the interests of those people. So anybody who likes beauty or rare beauty or Selena Gomez might see that episode and be more inclined to click on it rather than me just say how to build a meaningful brand. I tapped into rare beauty and I took a little bit of real estate from her and I created an episode on that. So that was my strategy to try to push my SEO, my search engine optimization, a little further. And it got me in front of those eyeballs. I think if you're going to create a podcast, no matter what topic you use, think about it from that lens. Because a lot of the time, talking about yourself, if you're someone who people don't know, unless you have an amazing personality, and that's like influencer status, okay? Like at that point, you've already created an influencer reputation because your personality is that amazing and funny, or you have something about you that people just love. Then I would say talk about yourself, use your podcast as a way to share your lifestyle or the things you're learning and going through. But if you could somehow take the topics that interest you and turn them into a different perspective that people haven't heard before, I think you'll get a lot further in generating visibility in your podcast, at least early on. And then when people start to know who you are, they're a little bit more inclined to listen to you. For example, the first 2 episodes that I have, the first one is on my messy journey, right? The second one is on rare beauty. Guess which one actually got the most clicks? It was rare beauty, right? People don't know me. People don't care about me until I give them a reason to do so. And that's going to take through time, trust, repetition, and visibility. So I think that's kind of the angle that I would choose and the strategy that I would recommend. And the final thing in strategy is to name your podcast around an identity or something that people can attach themselves to. I've noticed just through research that a podcast that people can resonate with and be like, Girls Who Build is very clear. These are girls who are building. And if you're someone who's building, you might find yourself feeling like you belong to that kind of community and that identity of a person. And if you can name your podcast after something like that, I think it just helps with the overall vibe of the podcast, the mission. People are probably going to click on it more because it's surrounding an identity that they also resonate with versus some random name that people are like, what does that even mean, until you listen to it, right? And I see a lot of podcast names like that where I'm like, oh, that's creative. But if you can try to find a way for there to be some form of identity or a shared outcome or goal that those type of people have. So whoever your audience is, think about some shared interests, some shared outcomes or goals that they want in their life, and see if you can develop a name that is catchy. And obviously it's hard to find one that's not taken. You got to do some research and figure out if there's other people who have that before you try to take it. Always make sure that you have the Instagram handle as like a place to dump episode clips, right? And that's like mini promotion. That's all for strategy. Next, I want to get into the setup. So I want to talk about lighting. Lighting is huge. Lighting is a headache. To be completely fair with you, if you want to know how much I actually spent on my entire podcast setup, I'd say it's about $650 or something. But I have to be completely honest, I had pretty much everything. The only thing I didn't have was my microphone, my mic stand, and I didn't have the light that's behind me, the ambiance light. Everything else I had and I just repurposed in my house. I didn't buy new furniture. I didn't buy my lighting because I already had the light. But a couple things to recommend here. You know, when people are on a set, like on a movie set, the photographer or the videographer or whoever, the director is over there trying to fix up the camera and they need like a stand-in so that they can adjust the lighting in the right way. They always have a replacement person who just stands in their shoes for a little bit. Well, I don't have a second person with me, so this is a pain in the butt. But every time that I wanted to check how the lighting was, I would have to press play, record myself, and then go and review the footage. And if I didn't like it, okay, I would move the lighting a little bit more to the left, to the right, and then do it again. And then record myself, come sit down, go look at it. And it was such a time suck. Now I have it kind of memorized. Like it's always in the same place, right? But if I go to a new spot and try to record, it's going to be a whole nother process of learning that. And so I say all this to say I recommend a couple different things. I am in my office right now. In the corner where you can't see, it's off camera, I have a desk and I have a desktop monitor that I always connect with my laptop so that I can have 2 screens to work from. So what I did is I got a micro HDMI that connects my Sony ZV-E10, which is the camera that I'm using to film all of this on. And I connected that to my desktop monitor. So now I'm able to look to my right and I can see myself and I can see how much I'm filming, if I'm getting my whole body in or whatever. I personally like when I'm recording to be waist up. I think you can see my facial expressions a lot more. I think it's a lot easier to feel connected versus if you were to get a full angle of me. And plus, I just don't want to have to worry about my pants, right? And always wearing jeans or something. I'm just in sweatpants. You also want to make sure that when you're filming, you're not so close and zoomed in that you can't crop for social media. I used to have this mistake when I was filming YouTube videos and I could never take any of the footage that I created and use it for social media because my face was so zoomed in at that point and it looked really awkward. So make sure that you're kind of at least, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 feet away and you're able to crop it into a smaller social media clip. That was something I had to learn the hard way through a lot of trial and error. I would definitely film like maybe 2 or 3 and then see what it looks like, download it on your computer and put it in vertical mode and see if that's the perfect angle for you before you record the whole podcast episode. Because those social media clips are so useful and so handy, and it's going to be really important that you have those. So don't skimp on that. I don't like to have my phone up because it never looks like the same lighting and it always looks kind of weird. But ideally, I would have another Sony camera at a different angle at like a 45, and then I can have 2 different angles that I can bounce between just to give some variety and make it look a little bit more professional. But for now, I think this is just fine. The other thing about setup that people don't talk about is batteries. Batteries die so quickly. And if it dies in the middle, that's just a bummer. And then the second time I come back to film, the lighting is going to be a little bit off. And if I try to edit some footage from the last video, some from this one, it just doesn't look good. And this is probably me being very like perfectionist and nitpicky, but that bothers me so much when the colors don't match up or the angle of the camera doesn't match up or my hair isn't in the right place, and I'm like, well, that's so clearly done on 2 different days, and it just drives me crazy. I highly recommend, instead of buying additional batteries, I bought this. It's like a fake battery that goes into the wall. Like I plug it in and it just stays on my camera. And it's really useful because it's not like a real battery, but it takes the place of a real battery. And then the battery slot just stays open. And that's really useful because I can film for hours and it's just plugged into the wall. I love that. So right now on my camera, I've got one side plugged into my desktop monitor and then the other one is plugged into the wall for the battery power. Love it. Highly recommend. And those things are so like, those are just wires that are really cheap to buy. It's not a whole expensive project. And then when it comes to the lighting, so I am no expert with lights, okay? But this is stuff that I've learned along the way. There are things called the 3-point lighting system and the 4-point lighting system. I personally am doing, I guess 4, maybe 5 right now. So that just means how many light angles you have going on at any moment. And I've always had a really hard time with lighting. And I have to remind myself, Christina, you are not like a professional photographer. You did not go to school to learn lighting on a set, right? So I'm going to do the best that I can with what I have. And I want you to take that too. So if this is overwhelming, I'm so sorry. It's helpful to learn a little bit as you go. The big thing that you should have is your key light. And this is your key light. This is the most important light that you're going to need. And what I typically do is at a 45-degree angle. So imagine if I was in a box and this corner, the left corner, is where that light is going to be facing. It's going to be slightly above my face and pointed downward. And you'll notice what I was saying earlier about having to constantly like check my light. It's because you can have certain shadows. I used to have it lower and I was like, why did my face look like that shape? I didn't like it. If I have it too far off to the left, it's going to light my face weird and then you're not going to see my eyes clearly. If I put it too high up, it almost looks like I don't have any light, right? And you have to really play around with what angle is going to look best for you. And if you have glasses, that's also going to come into play because you don't want to have this big glare on your glasses while you're filming. So I have a key light that is the one in the 45-degree. The other thing I usually have is another one on my opposite side. And so this is on my left. I would have one on my right and it's going to be a little bit dimmer. It's not going to be super like in my face. It's usually a ring light and it's just something to give like 50%, right? If one of my light bulbs is a little more cool, tones, I'd have the other one a little more warm tone so it balances each other out. Because I've always noticed when I go to edit that if I do certain light bulbs or certain things, it'll always come out blue and it looks a little weird, right? You would have two lights at your 45s in front of you. And then behind you, I learned the hard way through a lot of trial and error that you want to have lighting that separates you from your background, especially if your background is super close. Like for me, I got the curtains just to add a little bit of texture so it wasn't just a blank white wall. And I love the curtains. I think it gives it a luxury, cozy vibe. But because I'm still so close, I'm about 2 feet away from my wall and my curtains. You need something that separates you a little bit. And I've seen people do the before and after when they add a backlight, and it is completely different and it looks so much better and so much more like professional. I got a vertical tube light from Amazon. It was like 30 something dollars. You can change the colors. I always try to keep it on some kind of an orange glow because I think that looks the most appealing on camera and it kind of fits the vibe of the room, but you can pick whatever color you want. My only thing is I got a vertical light, and so now it's laying horizontally on the floor because that's the way that it looked best on camera. I did originally have it standing as a vertical light next to the plant, but it like didn't have the effect. It didn't give off the light the way it needed to. And so now it just sits. I have a ottoman back there and it just sits on top of that, and sometimes one side of it will kind of like move a little bit and it won't turn on because it's basically a light tube in three different parts and they all kind of plug in together. And so one side might be really strong, the other one is not working correctly because it's horizontal and it's not meant to be horizontal. But the tube lights that I found that were horizontal were way smaller. They were maybe like a foot long, and this one is like 5 feet or something. So I personally like the effect of this one more. So I recommend something like that to separate you from the background. I have a candle warmer on my right side, and I think it just adds a nice little touch and it gives a glow behind me. And it's just a really pretty candle warmer, I'm not gonna lie. And it fits my aesthetic completely. So I just leave that. So in total, you've got that was like 4 lights that I mentioned. The other thing I added, which I like it with it, actually surprisingly, is my room lights, the one in the center of the room that is shining down on my head. And I've seen a lot of YouTubers talk about their lighting and they have something like a hair light that like shines on their head. And that's also another way to create more dimension in your frame. And I figured, well, instead of going out and buying one, let me just turn on the light that's in the room. I hate using top lights, but with this, it actually works really well because it's a little warmer and it gave that warm glow. And then the final thing about the lights is this specific key light, the one doing most of the lighting in my room right now, the one on my left side at the 45-degree. It comes with a white sheet that goes over it. It's like this plastic vinyl type of sheet that's velcroed on. I didn't love that. It was really making my face really shiny. So I went and found a pillowcase in my bedroom, and I specifically found it's a silky beige, like satin pillowcase. And now that is my go-to. And it really gives a glow in this room. It's very soft versus having the white. It felt like I kept putting the light too close and it would create this weird light bouncing off of my forehead and my nose, and I hated that look. And then I tried to move it further away and it felt like it wasn't even lighting my face anymore. So the perfect balance was putting a pillowcase over it instead. So you might have to play around with whatever you have available to you. If you need to go buy all brand new, I do have a link for you down below so you can see everything that I've purchased. See and play around with it. It will take a lot of trial and error, but that's what you got to do sometimes, especially if you don't have someone helping you and you're just by yourself trying to figure it all out. So I was asked about headphones, and you probably noticed a lot of these podcasters will do the big, bulky, over-the-ear headphones. That looks really cool and all, but those are over $100. And I was like, maybe I could do this more cost effectively. And that is why I'm using my iPhone headphones, my wired headphones. I plug this into the microphone. And the reason why you should definitely use something for your ears is so that you can hear yourself. Now, I thought I didn't need the headphones. The first time I did this, I was like, oh, it looks kind of weird. I just didn't want the vibe of the headphones. And so I recorded an entire podcast episode just to find out when it was all said and done that it was muted. Like my microphone was on mute and I had no idea. And I have a Shure MV7 Plus. There's a little light at the top of my microphone, and if you touch it, it mutes you. So you have to be very careful. It's not a button, it's like a touch screen. So if you touch it and it mutes you, well, now you're completely screwed and you just wasted all of that time filming an episode of your podcast. It has to get re recorded. So that's what I did. So never make that mistake. Always have headphones. You can always get away with these, cheap iPhone headphones. You don't need the fancy one. That's something I definitely recommend because you learn the hard way. And the other thing regarding the microphone is that there are two different types of microphones that people have the option to buy. You can buy an XLR or a USB. I honestly think a USB is just fine. And if you buy an XLR, it's just like this fancy system, and you have to buy something called an audio interface, which connects to your laptop because the audio cannot automatically connect and convert into MP3 the way it's supposed to. I was like, why am I going to go through that headache? Maybe in the future, maybe that changes the quality slightly, but most people can't really see that and they can't hear the difference. And so I got a microphone that does both. I said, I'll get the USB. That's the main one that I use. But in the future, if I do want to get more fancy with it, I can do an XLR, then I can buy an audio interface and then do all of the fancy bells and whistles. But honestly, it's not needed. It really isn't. And so why would I go through all of that hassle of learning this whole new system and stuff just for that? What I simply do is I have the Shure microphone. There's an app that it comes with called Motive Mix, and I just hit record on that. I hit record on my camera. And then when everything is all said and done, I upload them to Final Cut Pro and I sync the audio together. And it does perfectly for me. Like, I don't need to do more. I don't need to go to GarageBand or Audacity or any of these other places when I already have Final Cut Pro in my system. I've already been really comfortable with Final Cut Pro because of YouTube. So why not? I don't know if that makes it easier for you, but it definitely made it easier for me because XLR is more expensive. Like, you're going to have to buy more stuff along with it. And especially if you're going to have two microphones and two podcast stands and all that stuff, like, find what works for you. The other thing about my microphone stand is I actually had a hard time finding a microphone stand that was on the floor. Most of them are either going to be table, like gaming system kind of microphones where you just have like a little tabletop stand, or they're going to be clip on to a table. And that only works if you have like an actual table that you can use. But I love the flexibility of having this because I figured in the future, if I want to take my podcast out in public and I can have like a podcast studio space or whatever, I can use this anywhere without having to force myself into having a table. And yeah, plus I love the cozy vibe. I didn't want a table. I thought that would just add too much bulkiness to it and make it a little bit more corporate-y. And I really wanted that casual, lived-in, cozy energy for this podcast. And I think that having a tabletop one would kind of kill the view and the style. I completely forgot to mention this, but the nice thing is in my office, I have carpet on the floor. Now, if you don't have carpet and you have hardwood or tile, I have read and heard from a ton of people is that if you have hardwood, there's going to be a lot of echoing. And so around your podcast setup, you're going to want to put a ton of blankets and pillows and all kinds of things on the floor to muffle the sound as much as possible. The better quality your microphone is, I think that's going to help you a lot. But in other cases, you may find that the sound is just not the best quality when you do this. Just take that into account and make sure that you're able to figure out a good solution for that, because I think audio is the most important part of the entire podcast. And if you don't have good audio, a lot of people hate listening to it until they finally develop a really good trust in who you are and they are gonna listen regardless. But until that point, your audio has to be crisp and beautiful, and it has to sound amazing. I always do a test of my podcast episode in the car as I'm driving. How would people listen to this in the car? How would people listen to this in the gym or on their headphones? How is it going to sound different from place to place? And you really want to make sure your audio is good. So if you don't have carpet and you have hardwood or tile, make sure you take that into account. Add some pillows, add some blankets, do whatever you got to do to soften it up. Because in a podcast studio that's professionally created, they have all these panels on the wall default that dampen the sound, and those acoustics really come into play. But if you don't have that set up, right, and you don't buy dampeners, you're gonna have to figure it out. And that's like a really cheap and easy way to do it. So I hope that helps. On to the rest of the episode. So I talked about Final Cut Pro a little bit, but not only do I use that, I use Descript. I used it for YouTube videos because there is just something life-changing about seeing the words that you're saying and editing the words, not the sound waves. Because on Final Cut Pro, you have to basically listen to every second. You have to take the time to edit out the breaths, right? Every time you're breathing, every pause, every awkward right? But on Descript, you can basically say, take out all of the likes, take out any gaps that are longer than whatever seconds you want, like 0.5, zero point 0.3. And it's just a lot easier and faster to edit that way. It's really great. It's the only one that I found that I actually really like. I will say that I am a proponent of using Descript. However, please remember, if you go out and buy the membership or the subscription or whatever it's called, try not to use their AI for everything, because I have noticed sometimes I will try to be quick about it and do like a mass deletion of all the gaps. Like you can go erase gaps that are over zero point 0.5 seconds. And there are certain parts where I'm physically talking and the system doesn't recognize me as talking, and they'll cut out my words. And unless you go through it and listen to it, you're like, wait, that was completely cut out. And you have to try to reverse that. And I haven't found a successful way to get that information back. Overall, I do try to manually edit most of it, but the words are a game changer. It's just to have your script in front of you. And then you can also use their repurposing. They have some AI stuff where they'll repurpose into blog posts, they'll repurpose and pull clips out that they recommend for social media. I have not loved the way that it does that. I still find myself manually doing it, but you can look through your script really quickly and figure out which areas you want to pull, and then you can just copy the text and then right click and then create a new composition, and that'll create a new vertical for you so that you can put in social media. It's just so much easier than Final Cut Pro. I do still go back and forth and use Final Cut Pro for the syncing of both audios. I use it for any type of graphics and animations and intros and music. I don't love using Descript for that. It's just not as intuitive for me, but I have to use both systems a little bit. It still saves me a lot of time. And the final thing I want to talk about is launching. I don't think I did the best job at launching this podcast, I'll be honest, but I did try to make sure that I was planning ahead of time. I just wasn't able to have all of the content that I really wanted to get done. I had a lot that I was juggling, but I do recommend if you're launching a podcast, you want to try to launch and create buzz around it at least a week in advance, maybe more. But you have to also think that people have short attention spans, right? And saying something a couple times a month ago is probably not going to be on their radar. So the week before, that's when you want to really lead into that. I tried to release my episodes on a Saturday morning. I thought that would be a better time that people weren't at work and they had the ability to kind of listen and see it. A lot of people on a Saturday morning are probably on their phone on social media, so they'll see my stuff on Instagram about it. And that was my strategic thinking on when to launch the podcast. I also tried to launch with at least 2 episodes. Ideally, I wanted to have like 3, and then I wanted to release another one shortly after. So I would recommend that if you can do 3 episodes to start, and maybe 48 hours after launching, you have another episode. I only did 2. Do the best that you can with that, but trying to have more than one just to give people more time with you and to see the variety and the formats that you're going to choose. I think again, like you should have a couple different formats and let people see the different styles and the different things that they can learn from you. So I use Spotify for creators, and that's where I upload all of my episodes. But just because you upload your episodes and you set up your podcast and you have your podcast art in there and your descriptions doesn't mean that that's official on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or Google or anywhere else. So you want to make sure that you're able to go to every single podcast place that you want your podcast to be on and make sure that you create the podcast through them. And so that way they can verify it. And then that's going to usually take at least 48 hours or 24 hours or something. Because when I had to do it, it was the night before and I was like, oh crap, I didn't realize that this is not going to go live tomorrow, like I said. And I was telling everybody on Instagram, it's going to be live at 10 a.m. And so if you don't have it live, well, it's just kind of a bummer and it doesn't lead to a good customer experience or, audience experience. So try to make sure that you do that a couple days before. You can do everything within Spotify for creators, but then it'll use an RSS feed to sync it up everywhere else. Now, I highly recommend video. I mean, I honestly don't think it's even worth creating a podcast if you're not going to do video, straight up. In 2026, it's just not, it doesn't make any sense. If you're going to do video, you might as well have a YouTube. So, now is your time. If you're going to be a podcaster, you can be a YouTuber too. I will be honest, YouTube is really pushing podcasts. There's a little bit of a learning curve, and it's not as easy as just uploading everything to Spotify and then RSS feeding it over to YouTube. You're going to have to manually upload into YouTube. But they push and promote a lot of podcasts. And I think that if you're going to create all that work, you might as well put it on YouTube. I think Netflix is also diving into the podcast world. So they're trying to compete heavily with YouTube. And Spotify now has video too. So there's like all these places where you have a lot of opportunity. I don't know what the Netflix situation is with podcasts, but I can only imagine that in the future it'll kind of be a similar interface as YouTube possibly. And you never know what opportunities are going to come from that. So I do recommend having video on YouTube. You might as well get started with that. And if you're going to do YouTube, having knowledge in SEO, search engine optimization, is going to be really, really important, because the most important thing on YouTube for visibility is going to be your thumbnail and your title and the keywords that you're using within your episodes. So my big thing from thinking from a marketing lens and from a strategy lens is, in general, when you're planning out your podcast, really try to figure out and think before you actually create your episode ideas, what are keywords that people might be interested in that this whole angle in this podcast episode can be around? And that's going to drive a lot of your decisions on how you talk about your episodes. I've done this forever. When I was coming up with ideas for YouTube videos, I wouldn't just be like, oh, what do I want to talk about today? I would actually go and see, what are people searching? What's seasonally happening around me? What's culturally happening around me? How can I bake those keywords into the title and then let that influence the video and the script and the topics that I talk about within the video? And I think that's going to play really well in your favor on YouTube. The hard thing with podcasts is that there is really no search engine system here. Really, something that drives a lot of the search capabilities for podcasts, at least on Apple, is reviews. And having a good review and a good rating for your podcast is really going to weigh heavily on you on Apple. And that's how they generate like their, top 10 or whatever their list is for their newest podcast shows. If I haven't said it yet, please go and review us on Apple. I would really, really appreciate it, because that is going to be the most important place to review. Spotify also allows you to, but I think on Spotify, it's just like a star system and it's not going to weigh as heavily as it will on Apple. But that same concept applies to YouTube too. There's not really a way to review you, but people can subscribe, people can comment. You should always respond to these comments. So there's like a whole lot of stuff that you can do on YouTube that's really fascinating and smart if you're going to tap into the podcast world. And the final thing I want to talk about is your podcast art. So if you haven't seen already, my podcast art is pink, and I chose a very bold and bright and strong pink because I wanted it to be noticeable. I wanted it to stick out. I think it's really nice to have the neutral and the beautiful aesthetic podcast art, but I do recommend looking into colors, color psychology, and also seeing how that color looks on a tiny little screen, like on your phone when people are searching for podcasts. I did this a couple times where I would go into like business and entrepreneurship and all those different categories. And I was like, okay, what are the general color themes and styles? And a lot of them were kind of the same, or they would have either very neutral or very like dark blue or whatever. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go pink. One, because we're girly and I like girly things and I like pink. It's one of my favorite colors. But also, I chose a strong pink, a strong, like in your face, kind of aggressive pink, because I wanted it to stand out. When someone sees it, it just instantly clicks what this podcast is about. And think about that when you go through your podcast options and see what the names of things are, what's the style, what's the vibe, what colors are people leaning to? Are there faces in the cover art? Is it just, words? Like, what is the vibe within the industry that you're trying to target? And then see if there's any way that you can really make an impact and be completely different from them. I think that helps because again, Apple and Spotify, they don't really have a whole lot of help with discoverability, right? It's very hard to get your podcast discovered unless you figure out how to market it in different ways. And that's going to come through social media. That's going to come through these little tiny things that you do that make a really big difference, like the name of the podcast, the cover art of the podcast, the colors you choose. And to get that across to people really quickly when they're just scrolling through and they have no idea who you are, that's going to really make or break in a lot of ways. So that's kind of how I think about it. And I really, really hope that helped. I don't know if I forgot anything else. These are all the things I could think of. I spent a couple days trying to write all the details out because I really wanted to make sure that I gave you some really good nuggets of information. This is all obviously from my personal experience, but I'm sure that if I went through these struggles, other people are probably going to go through these struggles too. So we might as well talk about it together. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this episode. And I really cannot wait to see your own podcast and the journey that you go on. So I'll see you guys in the next episode. Talk to you later. Bye.